Well, thanks a lot. Of course, this is a geopolitical crisis, and what's at stake is how the world is going to be shaped for many years to come. And there is a view that I've wanted and held for a long time, which is that we have an open, peaceful, interconnected world. And there's another view, which is that we're divided into camps and at war with each other, whether wars on the margins of these two camps or something even dreadfully worse. And we're right now, really at the at a moment of truth for the world, and it's not clear which way we're going. For me, you mentioned I've been a witness to this for a long time, and indeed, I really was a witness to these events already 33 years ago. I was the lead advisor to Poland in its first post-communist government. I was then advisor to Gorbachev's economic team through Grigory Yavlinsky in 1990 and 91. I became advisor to Yeltsin in 1991 to 1993. And I was advisor to Leonid Kuchma, first president of independent Ukraine, in 93. So I watched from the very beginning. And, I'm a softie and a bit of an idealist, so I really liked Gorbachev. Many people did not for many reasons, but I really liked Gorbachev's vision of a world that was at peace. He was really a man of peace. His fundamental point was don't shoot, and that meant the unraveling of the Soviet Union in the end. He was the one who pulled the plug on the Warsaw Pact and thought that the other side, the US-led NATO side, would understand that there was an opportunity actually for a peaceful world that didn't have these two competing blocs. And I signed on to that vision. I always believed in the common European home. So people call me naive, stupid, maybe I am, but anyway, I believe that it was the right way to go. And we obviously have seen that utterly, completely, totally, disastrously come crashing down. And so I pondered for 30 years how we got so horribly off track. And I think it's pretty clear that both sides played into this, but I utterly resent and did resent already 30 years ago that the US couldn't get it through or US leaders couldn't get it through their sometimes thick skulls that Russia didn't have to be an enemy, that it could actually just be a counterpart, even a partner on many things, and that at a time of duress at the end of the Soviet moment, it was time actually to find a path to peace. Even before that, perhaps naively, I thought that Gorbachev's attempt to democratize the Soviet Union was good and should have been supported also economically. But I have to tell you, perhaps the most amazing single moment of my professional life was actually being in the Kremlin in December 1991, when Boris Yeltsin walked across the room, entered a room from a far door, walked across the room to where I was heading a small economics delegation, sat down and said, "Gentlemen," because it was all men, "Gentlemen, I want to tell you the Soviet Union is finished." And he pointed to the far door and said, "I've just met with the leaders of the Soviet military, and they have agreed to the dissolution of the Soviet Union." So I heard that literally out of Yeltsin's mouth that moment, and believed that it augured peace and cooperation, and obviously that has not come to pass. So yes, this is a geopolitical crisis. This is not a war between Russia and Ukraine mainly. This is a war between Russia and the West, if you will, especially a war between Russia and the U.S. But we use those terms. It's a war between small groups leading these countries, and especially in the U.S., the neocons who have led U.S. foreign policy basically for the last 30 years, and I think have led it disastrously wrong.
Absolutely. Now, can I just, because a lot of things there, but first of all, you talked about Eastern Europe. How is it that Eastern Europe, not just the West, has become so radicalized? Because I remember Tadeusz Mazowiecki, who was the Prime Minister of Poland. He came across to me as an extremely measured, very, sensible, rational man. He did not, it seems to me, seek confrontation with the Russians at that time. There was general goodwill. I mean, we also had in the Czech Republic, we had a leadership which was also willing to work with the Russians, and yet Eastern Europe has also become radicalized. It's now become extremely hostile to Russia. It's almost driving the hostility to Russia within the European Union. Is this a consequence of the divisions? Is this a consequence of NATO expansion? Is that strengthened certain elements within these societies that have sought confrontation? And is NATO expansion the root of the problem?
Yeah, these are great questions and somewhat imponderable or unknowable. The animosities between Poland and Russia are deep. They go back centuries. Poland, of course, remembers being dismembered in part by the Russian Empire, but the Russians remember Poland invading Russia in the times of trouble. So this is a conflict that goes back a very long way. But none of that makes any of this inevitable. It's all how events are shaped and perceived. And in the 1990s, there were debates everywhere about the future, so nothing was set in some hard and certain course. And in the US, the more we learn and the more we look back, there were debates between the neocons and those who really had the view that, of course, we can have normal relations with Russia. And those debates really did center on the NATO question. We had hardliners, of course, at the end of the George W. Bush senior administration, and I ran into them in a hard way because when I advised Poland, I knew a lot about how to end a financial crisis, and I made good recommendations, and they worked. But what was fascinating for me, and I didn't understand it at the time, is every recommendation I made was accepted by the White House almost immediately. It was weird. One day I raised $1 billion for Poland, literally from morning till night, because I said so. And they said, well, do you think this will work, Mr. Sachs? And I said, this is the right thing to do. And by the end of the day, the billion had been raised for a currency stabilization fund. And I patted myself on the back. God, am I good, And then 2 years later, when I made very similar recommendations for Yeltsin's government, every single one of them was rejected. And I thought, but come on, you just saw in Poland why this works, how it works, and so forth. I didn't really get at the time that I was playing economics and they were playing geopolitics. I was trying to help salvage a collapsing economy, and they were playing the board game Risk. Put your pieces on as many places on the board as you can. And I didn't really understand it at the time because I thought we were having an economics discussion and debate. But the point is that as of the mid 1990s, the original neocons on the Republican side, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, they had their counterparts on the Democratic Party side, because this isn't really partisan. This is elite U.S. politics. Madeleine Albright was a hardliner. Her vision was Central Europe's my place, my home, and Russia's the enemy. And Zbig Brzezinski was definitely not a lover of Russia, I would say. And so the debate ensued, and Clinton was kind of a weather vane and a political such a political freak. He wanted to win elections, and he felt that going with NATO enlargement was the right way to go. He sided with Albright and his Secretary of Defense at the time, really a gentleman and a decent man, Bill Perry, wrote in his memoirs 20 years afterwards that this was completely distressing to him, that he knew this was the wrong way to go, that this was going to inflame a crisis with Russia that was just being tamped down, that he was making his relations with his Russian counterparts. It was working. They were building a new kind of peaceful and trusting relationship, and this was going to blow the whole thing up. But Albright and Holbrooke and the other hardliners, and Clinton, very typical of him, by the way. Anyway, he went with it, not really thinking much about the consequences. To my mind, our greatest historian, statesman of the age, really a man of unbelievable knowledge and judgment, was George Kennan, who ironically was the author of the original containment, but he meant it in a completely different way from the version that was actually implemented, a non-military kind of approach. George Kennan knew immediately this is a massive debacle, and said so famously in 1997 that this is the new Cold War with Russia. So I watched all of that taking shape with horror, because I obviously knew people on both sides. I thought this was a dreadful mistake. But then the George W. Bush administration got worse. 9/11 freaked the U.S. out, and everything went haywire. But the neocons really took over, led by Cheney, of course. And NATO enlarged 7 more countries by 2007, including to the Black Sea with Bulgaria and Romania, including to the Baltics. This is getting pretty damn close. And then in 2008 was Bush's completely provocative, unnecessary, extraordinarily dangerous insistence that NATO commit to enlarging to Ukraine and to Georgia, really in a way fulfilling the plan spelled out cleverly in Zbig Brzezinski's 1997 book on the grand chessboard, where he said, you corner Russia, you end Russia's power and influence, and you basically have the linchpin to controlling Eurasia. And so that, I think, was the vision of the neocons. And President Putin, who was basically pro-European when he came into office, said in 2008 at the Bucharest Russia-NATO meeting, which followed one day the NATO summit in Bucharest, he told Bush, "You do this, I take back Crimea. Don't play this game." And to my mind, all of this was already extraordinarily dangerous. Then Obama came in, and like everything in the US, he got pulled into the same neocon orbit. I don't think it was his instinct or his knowledge, but he was very inexperienced. And Hillary Clinton was part of that. And of course, Victoria Nuland, who we've come to know so well. during all of this period started to guide policy. And I think when you look back, clearly the Yanukovych period is extraordinarily interesting and important in this story because Yanukovych actually rather cleverly and skillfully was trying to keep some kind of foothold and balance in the midst of this emerging great power confrontation over his country. And so Yanukovych wisely said, we stay neutral. Wisely said, Russia keeps its claim on the Crimean naval base dating back to 1783. Don't topple this. And Yanukovych was in a way, and I think in retrospect, with a lot of skill actually, was maintaining some kind of very fragile equilibrium. But the neocon, the neocon gears were turning, and of course, the U.S. Helped to play into, stoke, and God knows what else, and we don't know all the details, to overthrow Yanukovych in February 2014. And the war started at that point. And the war started because the equilibrium, which was extraordinarily fragile at that point, collapsed. And we've been at war now for 8 years, and it's absolutely a disaster. And first and foremost, a complete tragedy for Ukraine, but a disaster for the world.